On a transatlantic flight from New York to London, a simple dispute over a first-class seat 1A becomes the catalyst for a corporate catastrophe. A woman judged by her casual attire is told to move by an entitled passenger dripping in old money. The flight crew sides with the wealthy-looking woman, demanding the unassuming passenger relinquish her rightful seat. But they made a catastrophic mistake. That unassuming passenger wasn't just another traveler. She was a silent titan of the tech world, and with a single 5-word command, she would not only ground their plane, but shatter the lives of everyone who wronged her. This is the story of how a moment of prejudice triggered a billion-dollar chain reaction of karma. The first-class lounge at JFK's Terminal 4 was a symphony of hushed tones and the gentle clinking of glass. Businessmen in tailored suits reviewed quarterly reports on their tablets, while couples on holiday sipped champagne, their quiet laughter a stark contrast to the chaotic hum of the main concourse. In a corner armchair, away from the main thoroughfare, sat Zora Washington. To the casual observer, she was unremarkable. She wore a simple charcoal grey cashmere tracksuit, custom-made but devoid of any visible logos. Her hair was styled in intricate Fulani braids, and on her feet were a pair of pristine, unassuming white sneakers. The only hint of significant wealth was the watch on her wrist, a Patek Philippe, with a subtle, dark blue face. But even that was worn with an air of practicality rather than ostentation. Zora wasn't trying to hide her wealth. She was simply indifferent to displaying it. At 29, she was the founder and CEO of Auratech, a company whose proprietary software was the invisible lifeblood of half the world's logistical and aeronautical industries. She was a self-made billionaire, a ghost in the machine of global commerce, and today she was exhausted. She was flying to London to finalize the largest acquisition in her company's history, a deal that would cement Auratech as the undisputed global leader in predictive AI logistics. Sleep had been a luxury for the past month, and this 8-hour flight was her only chance to recharge before the final marathon of meetings. All she wanted was her seat, 1A, a window seat at the front of the cabin where she could curl up and be left alone. Her boarding group was called, and she quietly made her way onto the plane, giving the flight attendant at the door a polite smile. She navigated the narrow aisle to the front, her carry-on a simple leather duffel slung over her shoulder. But when she arrived at her seat, she found it occupied. A woman who appeared to be in her late 40s was settling in, meticulously arranging a silk pashmina over her shoulders. She was the physical embodiment of generational wealth. Her blonde hair was coiffed in an expensive, motionless style. Diamonds glittered at her ears and on her fingers. Her cream-colored Chanel suit was immaculate. She exuded an aura of unshakable entitlement, the kind that comes from a life where doors have always opened automatically. Zora stopped. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I believe you're in my seat." The woman, Caroline Prescott, looked up, her gaze sweeping over Zora's tracksuit with a barely concealed flicker of disdain. It was a look Zora had seen 1,000 times before in boardrooms, at investor meetings, in high-end restaurants. It was the look that said, "You don't belong here." "I'm quite sure you're mistaken," Caroline said, her voice crisp and dismissive. "This is 1A. I am in 1A. "I know," Zora replied calmly, "and my boarding pass says 1A. She held up her phone, the digital pass clearly displayed. Caroline didn't even glance at it. She waved a dismissive hand. "There must be an error. Check with the flight attendant. I'm sure your seat is further back." The implication hung heavy in the air. Zora didn't move. A quiet resolve settled over her. This was not the first time she had been challenged or underestimated, but today her patience was worn thin. The exhaustion from her work, combined with the sheer audacity of the woman, created a friction she wasn't willing to ignore. A flight attendant, a young man named David, with an eager-to-please smile, hurried over. "Is there a problem here, ladies?" Caroline immediately took control of the narrative. "Yes. This young woman is confused about her seating assignment. She's insisting this is her seat, but as you can see, I am already settled." David's smile faltered as he looked at Zora. His professional training told him to check both boarding passes, but his instincts, conditioned by a lifetime of social cues, sided with the impeccably dressed woman who radiated authority. He saw Zora's casual attire and made an instant, unconscious calculation. "Ma'am," he said, directing his attention solely to Zora, "could I please see your boarding pass?" Zora showed him her phone. He scanned it, and a flicker of confusion crossed his face. The system was clear. Seat 1A belonged to Zora Washington. He then turned to Caroline. "And yours, ma'am?" Caroline produced a paper boarding pass from her Hermes purse. It read 4B, a middle seat 4 rows back. David's face paled slightly. The situation was clear-cut, but his demeanor didn't reflect it. He was now faced with the awkward task of asking the formidable Mrs. Prescott to move. He lowered his voice, adopting a conspiratorial tone, as if speaking to Caroline. "It seems there has been a small mix-up," he began almost apologetically. "Your assigned seat is 4B. This seat," he gestured toward Zora, "belongs to this passenger." Caroline's expression hardened. "That's ridiculous. I always sit at the bulkhead. My travel agent knows this. There has been a mistake in your system. I am not moving to a middle seat." The confrontation was drawing quiet glances from other first-class passengers. Zora remained silent, her arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. She was an observer in her own drama, waiting to see how the system represented by this flight attendant would function. David wrung his hands clearly out of his depth. He looked from Caroline's unyielding face to Zora's calm one. He chose the path of least resistance. He turned back to Zora. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now laced with a pleading tone. "I see you have the window seat here. Seat 4B is also a very comfortable seat. Perhaps for the sake of getting the flight out on time, you would be willing to switch." Zora's eyebrows rose. "You want me to give up the seat I paid for and move to a middle seat because this passenger made a mistake?" "It would be a great help," David pressed, avoiding the core of her question. "We need to close the cabin doors for departure." The injustice of it was breathtaking. She was the one with the correct ticket, the one following the rules, yet she was being asked to accommodate the person who was clearly in the wrong, simply because that person was louder, richer-looking, and more demanding. It was a microcosm of a world she fought against every single day. "No," Zora said the single word, cutting through the tense air. "I will not be moving. I will be sitting in the seat assigned to me on my ticket. Please ask the other passenger to move to her correct seat." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, leaving no room for negotiation. David's face flushed with a mixture of panic and frustration. Caroline let out an indignant huff, turning to her seatmate in 1B, a man in a business suit, and muttered just loud enough for Zora to hear. "The entitlement of some people is just astonishing." The battle line had been drawn over a few square feet of premium cabin space, but for Zora it was about something much, much bigger. And she had no intention of backing down. The stalemate hung in the air thick and uncomfortable. David, the flustered flight attendant, looked desperately around for support and found it in the form of Margaret, the senior cabin purser. Margaret was a woman in her 50s with a stern, no-nonsense demeanor, honed by 30 years of service. She strode to the front of the cabin, her expression already telegraphing her impatience. "What is the hold-up, David?" she asked, her voice sharp. This passenger in 1A, David began gesturing towards Caroline, is in the wrong seat. Her seat is 4B. This passenger, he indicated Zora, has the boarding pass for 1A, but she is being uncooperative. The framing was subtle, but devastating. Caroline was a passive occupant. Zora was the uncooperative one. Margaret's eyes landed on Zora, and the same dismissive scan that Caroline had performed took place. She saw the tracksuit and sneakers, not the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. "Ma'am," Margaret said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We have a schedule to keep. Either take the seat in 4B or we will have to deplane you for failing to follow crew instructions." The threat was shocking in its directness. Zora was being threatened with removal from a flight for insisting on sitting in her own paid-for seat. The other passengers were now openly staring, some with sympathy, others with annoyance at the delay. Caroline, sensing the tide had turned completely in her favor, leaned back in the seat with a smug smile. "Thank you," she said to Margaret, as if the matter was settled. "Some people just don't understand how things work." Zora felt a cold, clear anger rise within her. It wasn't a hot, blinding rage, but a precise, focused fury. She had built an empire on logic, on systems, on the principle that the correct input yields the correct output. The system here was failing, spectacularly overridden by human prejudice. "Let me be perfectly clear," Zora said, her voice dropping to a low, intense timbre that made both David and Margaret pause. "My name is Zora Washington. My boarding pass is for seat 1A. This woman is in my seat. I have asked politely for her to move. You have not facilitated that. Instead, you have asked me, the wronged party, to accommodate her. Now you are threatening to remove me from the flight. You are making a very serious mistake." Margaret scoffed. "The only mistake being made is you holding up an international flight. We don't have time for this." She reached for her intercom handset to call the gate agent. "I wouldn't do that," Zora said calmly. "And why is that?" Margaret retorted, her hand hovering over the button. Zora held her gaze. "Because my identity is not just a name on a boarding pass. It is intrinsically linked to the operational capacity of this aircraft and this airline." This statement, so cryptic and grand, was met with a look of utter disbelief from the crew. Caroline actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of derision. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Caroline sneered. "Are you an air marshal, some sort of secret celebrity, the affirmative action hire on some diversity board? Just move to the back of the plane where you belong." The racist undertone was no longer an undertone. It was a blaring siren. The insult was so blunt, it sucked the air out of the immediate vicinity. The passenger in 1B, who had been trying to mind his own business, visibly flinched. Zora's expression didn't change, but a decision crystallized in her mind. She had tried reason. She had tried patience. Now she would use a system of her own design. She slowly pulled her phone from her pocket, ignoring the sputtering Margaret and the triumphant Caroline. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, pulling up a secure contact. It was simply labeled Leo. She pressed the call button. "You have 5 seconds to ask Mrs. Prescott to move to her assigned seat," Zora said to Margaret, holding the phone to her ear. 5, 4. "This is ridiculous, I'm calling security," Margaret snapped, finally pressing the intercom button. 3, 2. The phone picked up on the other end. Zora didn't even say hello. 1. She spoke 5 simple, chilling words into the phone. "Leo, initiate protocol Nightingale." She hung up. A strange silence fell over their small group. Caroline looked at her as if she were insane. Margaret was speaking into the intercom, requesting the captain be notified of a disruptive passenger. David looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. For about 10 seconds, nothing happened. Caroline smirked, crossing her arms. "Well, that was dramatic. Are you finished with your little performance?" Then a chime echoed through the cabin, the one that precedes a message from the flight deck. The captain's voice, usually a calm and reassuring baritone, came over the PA system. But this time, it was laced with confusion and urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Apologies, but we have just received a mandatory fleet-wide, a critical avionics software directive from air traffic control. I've never seen anything like this. We are instructed to hold our position. Please remain seated. We will update you shortly." A murmur of confusion rippled through the entire plane from first class to economy. A fleet-wide directive, critical software. Before anyone could fully process this, the captain's voice came on again, this time audibly strained. "Update from the flight deck. Ladies and gentlemen, we are being ordered to return to the gate immediately. All Global Airways flights currently on the tarmac at JFK are being instructed to do the same. We have been grounded. I repeat, we have been grounded. I have no further information at this time." The gentle pushback from the gate that had just begun ceased abruptly. The massive engine spooled down with a mournful whine. The plane was dead in the water. In the stunned silence of the first-class cabin, every eye turned to the woman in the charcoal tracksuit. Margaret stood frozen, the intercom handset still in her hand. David's jaw was slack. Caroline Prescott's smug smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure bewilderment. Zora Washington simply slid her phone back into her pocket, her expression unreadable. She had not raised her voice. She had not made a scene. She had simply made a phone call. And in doing so, she hadn't just grounded a single Boeing 777. She had just grounded the entire North American fleet of Global Airways. The cabin, once a place of expectant energy for an overnight flight to London, was now a pressure cooker of confusion and anxiety. Murmurs turned into frustrated questions. Phones were immediately brought out as passengers tried to text loved ones or search for news. Why were they grounded? What was a fleet-wide avionics directive? Caroline Prescott, for her part, was furious. The bewilderment had quickly morphed into indignant rage. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she declared to no one in particular. "A complete failure of service. I have a board meeting in London tomorrow morning. Heads will roll for this, I assure you." She shot a venomous glare at Zora, as if this bizarre technical issue was somehow a part of her performance. Margaret and David, the flight crew, were in a state of professional shock. They exchanged panicked glances. Their earpieces were buzzing with frantic, confused chatter from the other flight attendants. A grounded fleet was a logistical nightmare of apocalyptic proportions for an airline. It meant thousands of cancelled flights, millions of dollars in losses per hour, and a public relations disaster. And the timing, immediately after the bizarre coded phone call, was too coincidental to ignore. The plane began a slow, funereal tow back towards the gate. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with fear of flying and everything to do with a power dynamic that had been inverted so suddenly and completely it felt like a law of physics had been broken. As the jet bridge reconnected to the aircraft with a solid thud, the main cabin door was opened. But it wasn't a gate agent who came on board. It was three figures moving with an urgency that commanded attention. The airline's JFK station chief, a man named Robert Henderson, and two men in dark suits who were clearly senior executives from Global Airways' corporate office, their faces ashen. They bypassed the economy and business class cabins, striding directly into first class. Their eyes scanned the passengers, and for a fleeting moment, Caroline puffed up. Assuming they were here to respond to a complaint She imagined Margaret had logged about the disruptive passenger. She prepared to unleash her fury upon them. But they didn't even look at her. Their eyes landed on Zora. Robert Henderson, the station chief, stepped forward, holding a tablet with Zora's file picture on it. He looked from the tablet to her face, and a wave of dawning horror washed over him. "Ms. Washington," he asked, his voice almost a whisper. The name was spoken with a reverence that was utterly baffling to everyone else present. Zora simply nodded. The senior executive next to him, a man who looked like he spent his life in boardrooms, stepped forward, practically bowing. "Ms. Washington, I'm Paul Taggart, Executive VP of North American Operations for Global Airways. There seems to have been a catastrophic misunderstanding." The revelation landed like a bomb. David, the flight attendant, looked as if he had seen a ghost. Margaret's stern facade crumbled, revealing a raw, naked fear. Caroline Prescott stared, her mouth slightly agape, the pieces clicking into place in the most terrifying way possible. "What's going on?" Caroline demanded, her voice lacking its earlier authority. Taggart ignored her completely, his entire focus on Zora. "Ms. Washington, we have a red flag on our entire network. A Nightingale lockdown protocol has been activated from a top-tier administrator account. The account belongs to Auratech. That's your company. We can't move a single plane. Our entire navigation, scheduling, and safety system is frozen." The full terrifying scope of the situation was now laid bare. Zora Washington wasn't just a passenger. She was the architect of their entire operational nervous system. Auratech's AuraNav system wasn't just some third-party software Global Airways used. It was a deeply integrated proprietary platform that ran everything from gate assignments and flight path optimization to real-time engine diagnostics and collision avoidance. It was the digital brain of the airline, and Protocol Nightingale, as the executives were now discovering in real time through panicked IT reports, was a fail-safe kill switch. It was a contractual enforcement tool buried deep in the fine print of $100 million a year contract, a clause Zora herself had insisted on. It could be activated by her or her designated second-in-command, Leo, in the event of a critical security breach, or what the contract vaguely termed a fundamental breach of partnership ethics. Being threatened with removal from a flight after being harassed in her paid-for seat, it turned out qualified as a fundamental breach. "Yes," Zora said, her voice still quiet, but now carrying the weight of the entire airline. "That's my company, and that's my protocol." Paul Taggart looked like he was about to be physically ill. He gestured frantically at the seat Caroline was occupying. "Is this the issue?" "The seat, we were told there was a seating dispute." "There was no dispute," Zora corrected him, her eyes finally moving to lock onto Carolyn. The situation was quite simple. Mrs. Prescott was in my seat. I asked her to move. She refused. Your crew was called. They saw my boarding pass and her boarding pass. They knew she was in the wrong. And yet they asked me to move. When I refused, they threatened to have me deplaned. Taggart's gaze shifted to Margaret and David, and the look in his eyes was murderous. "Is this true?" Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came out. David just stared at the floor, trembling. Their careers were over, and they knew it. Zora continued, her voice clinical and precise. "My contract with you is not just about software, Mr. Taggart. It's about partnership. It's predicated on a baseline of mutual respect. Today, your company, through its employees, demonstrated that it does not respect me, my business, or the simple, legally binding contract of an airline ticket. So I am forced to question the integrity of our larger, more complex contracts. If you can't honor a $3,000 ticket, How can I trust you to honor $100 million software agreement protocol? Nightingale was initiated to pause our partnership until this discrepancy could be resolved. The word discrepancy was delivered with such cold, devastating force that it made the executives flinch. She had framed the grounding of a multi-billion-dollar airline not as an act of anger, but as a logical, contractual consequence. Caroline Prescott finally understood. The woman she had dismissed as an affirmative action, hire the woman she had tried to bully out of a seat, was someone who held the fate of the entire airline in the palm of her hand. Her face, which had been a mask of smug entitlement just minutes before, was now a canvas of pale, sickening realization. The diamonds on her fingers suddenly seemed cheap and gaudy in the face of such absolute intangible power. She wasn't just in the wrong seat. She was on the wrong side of history. The first-class cabin of Flight 112 had transformed from a luxury space into a corporate tribunal. Paul Taggart, the executive VP, was in full damage control mode, his mind racing through the catastrophic financial and logistical implications of every second. His fleet remained paralyzed. Ms. Washington. He began, his voice dripping with a desperate sincerity. On behalf of Global Airways, I offer our most profound and humble apologies. What happened here is inexcusable. It is a failure of our training, a failure of our values, and a failure of our people. Please tell us what we can do to rectify this immediately. Zora looked at him, her expression unmoved. Rectification begins with accountability, Mr. Taggart. Her gaze shifted pointedly towards the two flight attendants. Taggart didn't hesitate. He turned to Robert Henderson, the station chief. Mr. Henderson, please escort these two employees. He gestured to Margaret and David, to your office. They are suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. Take their credentials. David looked like he was about to faint. Margaret, her face ashen, simply nodded, a lifetime of professional pride dissolving in a moment of public disgrace. Henderson quietly but firmly ushered them out of their own aircraft, their careers effectively over. With the first piece of accountability handled, Zora's calm, unwavering gaze moved to its final target, Caroline Prescott, who was now trying to make herself as small as possible in seat 1A. And then, Zora continued, there is the root cause of the problem. All eyes fell on Caroline. The atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. Caroline seemed to shrink under the weight of their collective stare. She was no longer a powerful society wife. She was a defendant in a trial she didn't even know she was a part of. Taggart understood immediately. Appeasing Zora Washington was now the single most important objective for the entire airline. He turned to Caroline, his previous deference replaced by a cold, corporate fury. Ma'am, he said, his voice hard as granite, you are to gather your belongings and deplane immediately. Caroline's head snapped up, a flash of her old defiance returning. What, you can't be serious? I am a paying customer. I have done nothing wrong. You have done nothing wrong, Taggart repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. Ma'am, you deliberately occupied a seat that was not yours. You refused to move when asked by the rightful ticket holder. You caused a disturbance that led to a confrontation. Your actions, and the subsequent mishandling by my staff, have directly resulted in a crisis that is currently costing this company millions of dollars per minute. You are being removed from this flight for violating our passenger code of conduct. The public humiliation was profound. Other passengers were now recording the scene on their phones. Caroline's face burned with a mixture of rage and shame. This is outrageous, she sputtered. Do you have any idea who I am? My husband is Jonathan Prescott, of Prescott & Finch, the law firm. We are Diamond Medallion members. We will sue this airline into the ground. The name drop intended to be a powerful threat fell completely flat. Jonathan Prescott might be a powerful lawyer, but Zora Washington was the woman who had just turned off the lights to their entire North American operation with a phone call. There was no comparison. "Your status has been noted, Mrs. Prescott," Taggart said icily. "It has also been revoked. You are hereby banned from flying with Global Airways for life. Now please leave the aircraft." Caroline was stunned into silence. Banned for life, it was a social death sentence in her circles. She looked around, searching for an ally, but found only cold, judgmental stares. The man in 1B, her unwilling audience, pointedly turned away to look out the window. She refused to move, paralyzed by disbelief. "No, I am not leaving." Taggart sighed, his patience exhausted. He nodded to the gate, and a moment later, 2 Port Authority police officers appeared at the cabin door. Their presence was the final, undeniable statement of her defeat. "Ma'am, you can leave the aircraft on your own, or the officers can escort you," Taggart stated flatly. The sight of the uniformed officers finally broke her resolve. With a choked sob of fury and humiliation, Caroline Prescott began to gather her things. Her movements were jerky and uncoordinated. She fumbled with her pashmina, dropping her expensive purse. Its contents, a wallet, lipstick, a gold pen, spilled onto the floor. As she scrambled to pick them up, her carefully constructed facade of aristocratic grace shattered completely. No one helped her. Finally, her belongings shoved haphazardly back into her bag, she stood up. She had to walk past Zora, who had now taken a step back to allow her passage. For a brief second, their eyes met. In Zora's there was no triumph, no malice. There was only a quiet, weary disappointment. In Caroline's there was a toxic brew of hatred, shame, and disbelief. As she was escorted off the plane, a pariah in Chanel, the sound of her designer handbag scraping against the floor of the jet bridge echoed in the silent cabin. The immediate karma had been delivered swift and brutal. The problem had been removed. But Zora knew this wasn't over. The ripples from this event were just beginning to spread. And for Caroline Prescott, the true consequences of her actions were only just beginning to take shape. With Caroline Prescott gone, a semblance of order returned, but the tension remained. Paul Taggart immediately turned back to Zora, his expression one of complete submission. "Ms. Washington," he said, his voice low, "the aircraft is yours. We can arrange for it to fly you and any other passengers you deem appropriate directly to London, or we can charter a private jet for you immediately. Whatever you wish." Zora considered this for a moment. She looked around at the other first-class passengers, who were now staring at her with a mixture of awe and fear. She had no desire to be on a flight where she was the subject of such intense scrutiny. "A private jet will be fine," she said simply. "But this flight," she gestured to the cabin, "is full of people who had plans in London. People with meetings, vacations, family to see. This wasn't their fault. You need to handle their arrangements and compensate them generously for this fiasco. And I want a full report on the retraining of your staff on racial bias and de-escalation sent to my office by the end of the month." "Of course, Ms. Washington." "Absolutely," Taggart agreed instantly. He also added, "And a $1 million donation will be made in Oratek's name to the charity of your choice as a formal apology." Zora nodded. "Make it to Black Girls Code?" Within 30 minutes, Zora was being escorted to a private hangar where a sleek Gulfstream G650 was being prepared for her. The airline had already moved her luggage. As she walked away from the commercial terminal, she could see the chaos she had unleashed. Dozens of Global Airways planes sat idle on the tarmac, metal behemoths rendered impotent. Meanwhile, the story was exploding online. A finance blogger named Kevin Wu had been sitting in seat 3A and had witnessed the entire confrontation. He had live-tweeted the events initially as a complaint about a flight delay, but his posts quickly gained traction as the drama unfolded. Tweet 1. Delayed on global airways. Gavin 12 to London. Some Karen in one day stole someone's seat and is refusing to move. Unbelievable entitlement. Tweet 2. Update. The crew is siding with the Karen. They're threatening to kick the other woman off the flight, even though her boarding pass is correct. This is nuts. Tweet 3. Holy. The woman who's being wronged just made a phone call. Said, initiate protocol Nightingale. Now the pilot is saying the entire fleet is grounded due to a software directive. This feels like a movie. Tweet. 4. Airline execs are on the plane. They're groveling to the woman from the seat dispute. They keep calling her Miss Washington. The Karen just got escorted off by police and banned for life. Who is this woman? By the time Zora was sipping tea at 40,000 feet over the Atlantic, the hashtag Hunter Protocol Nightingale was trending worldwide. Amateur internet sleuths quickly connected the dots. Miss Washington and a massive tech failure at Global Airways could only mean one person, Zora Washington, the reclusive genius CEO of Aura Tech. Her picture was everywhere. The story of the racist seat stealer and the billionaire tech CEO who grounded an airline became the viral story of the day. Far away in a glass-walled corner office in Midtown Manhattan, Jonathan Prescott was having a very bad day. His firm Prescott & Finch was on the verge of the biggest M&A deal in its history, the acquisition of a European tech logistics company called LogICore. It was a $9 billion deal that would make his firm a dominant player in the European market. The final negotiations were delicate, hinging on technology integrations. His phone buzzed. It was his partner, furious. "Jonathan, have you seen Twitter? Turn on the news. Now." Jonathan did, and his blood ran cold. The story was on every major news network. They weren't using his wife's name yet, but the description, a woman in a Chanel suit, escorted off flight GA112 by police, was unmistakable. Then his private line rang. It was Caroline, sobbing hysterically. "Jonathan, you won't believe the most horrible thing that just happened to me. The airline, they were dreadful. They kicked me off the flight. They banned me." "Caroline, shut up." Jonathan snapped his voice, dangerously low. "Just shut up for 1 second. The woman whose seat you took. Did you get her name? Some woman named Washington," she sniffled. They were treating her like she was the Queen of England. Zora Washington, I think. Jonathan felt the floor drop out from under him. Zora Washington, CEO of Aura Tech. He looked at the deal prospectus for the LogICore acquisition sitting on his desk. He flipped to the section on technology and intellectual property. The key asset, the entire foundation of LogICore's platform, the very thing they were paying $9 billion for, was its advanced predictive logistics software. Software that it licensed under an exclusive and ironclad agreement from a single critical partner. Aura Tech. Zora Washington held the kill switch not just for Global Airways, but for the biggest deal of his professional life. His wife hadn't just picked a fight with another passenger. She had declared war on the one person on Earth who could single-handedly torpedo his entire career. He hung up on his weeping wife. His hands were shaking. This was no longer about a ruined vacation or a bit of public embarrassment. This was about survival. His wife's petty prejudice and unthinking arrogance had just jeopardized a $9 billion deal and the future of his firm. The ripple had just hit his shore, and it was a tsunami. When Caroline Prescott finally arrived back at their palatial Park Avenue apartment, chauffeured in shame from the airport, She found Jonathan not waiting, with a comforting embrace, but with a face like thunder. He was pacing the living room, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. "What have you done?" He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "What in God's name have you done, Caroline?" "Me!" she cried, her own anger flaring up to mask the humiliation. "I was assaulted, I was disrespected. That woman. Jonathan interrupted, slamming his glass down on the marble coffee table. "Is Zora Washington, the founder of Auratech, the company that holds the master license for the Logicore platform." Caroline stared at him blankly. "What are you talking about? What is Logicore?" "The $9 billion deal I have been working on for 18 months. He roared, his composure finally cracking. "The deal that was supposed to be my legacy. Her company Auratech has to approve the transfer of the license to us post-acquisition. It's a standard change of control clause. She has sole discretion. She can veto the entire deal with a single email, and you just made her public enemy number one." The color drained from Caroline's face as the true magnitude of her actions finally sank in. This wasn't just about a flight. It was about money. Their status, their entire world. I didn't know," she stammered. "Of course you didn't know." Jonathan scoffed, a cruel, bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You never know. You just swan through life, assuming everyone is beneath you. You saw a black woman in a tracksuit, and your brain just short-circuited. You couldn't possibly imagine she was more important, more powerful than you, could you? Your prejudice just cost us, not me, us everything." For the next 24 hours, Jonathan frantically tried to perform damage control. He called every contact he had, trying to get a direct line to Zora Washington. His calls were never put through. His emails, filled with groveling apologies on behalf of his distraught and deeply remorseful wife, went unanswered. He was stone-walled at every turn. The C-suite at Auratech had formed a protective digital wall around their CEO. The news from his partners was grim. The board of Logicore in Zurich had seen the news. The story now, with Caroline's name attached to it, thanks to the flight manifest leaking online, was an international incident. Logicore, a progressive European tech firm, was horrified. The fatal call came 2 days after the incident. It was from the CEO of Logicore himself. The tone was polite, but glacial. "Jonathan," the voice on the other end said, "we are formally withdrawing from the acquisition talks. The board feels there is a fundamental misalignment of values between our two organizations. We cannot in good conscience enter into a partnership with a firm whose leadership is associated with such public displays of prejudice." It was a corporate execution. Jonathan didn't even try to argue. He knew it was over. He hung up the phone and sat in his office in stunned silence for a full hour. The deal was dead. The $9 billion prize gone. The reputational damage to Prescott and Finch was catastrophic. When he got home that night, the apartment felt cold and cavernous. Caroline was waiting, her face puffy from days of crying. "Did you fix it?" she asked, her voice small. Jonathan looked at her, but he didn't see his wife of 20 years. He saw a liability, a walking, talking representation of a fatal character flaw that had just incinerated his life's work. His love for her, he realized, had long been intertwined with the social and professional advantages she brought. Now she was an anchor dragging him down. "The deal is dead. Caroline," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Logicore pulled out. The partners are calling for my resignation. My reputation is in tatters." He walked over to the bar and poured himself another whiskey, his back to her. "My lawyer will be in touch with your lawyer in the morning," he said, staring out the window at the city lights. "I want you out of this apartment by the end of the week." Caroline collapsed onto a sofa, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. "Jonathan, no, you can't. It was a mistake. We can fix this." He turned to face her, his eyes as cold and hard as diamonds. "No, Caroline, you made the mistake. But we can't fix it. There is no we anymore. You built your entire world on a foundation of my money and my name, and you just lit that foundation on fire. This is the consequence." The hard karma had hit home. It wasn't just a lifetime ban from an airline. It was a lifetime ban from the life she knew. Her social standing, her wealth, her marriage, all of it was being repossessed. And the cause was not a stock market crash or a bad investment, but a single ugly moment of prejudice, a casual act of cruelty to a woman she had deemed unworthy of her respect. Weeks after the JFK incident, the London skyline stretched out before Zora Washington, a tapestry of historic spires and modern glass towers. She stood in a top-floor boardroom in the Shard, a glass of champagne in her hand, though she hadn't taken a sip. Below her, the city buzzed with an energy she was about to harness. The acquisition of Synapse Dynamics, a leading British AI firm, was complete. The final signatures scrawled on crisp documents just an hour ago had cemented Auratech's place as an untouchable titan in the global technology landscape. Her new London team celebrated around her, the relief and excitement palpable. They toasted her vision, her tenacity. They saw the composed, brilliant CEO who had just navigated a complex, multi-billion-dollar international deal. They knew nothing of the chaotic scene on the tarmac weeks ago, except for the legendary tale that was already becoming myth in the tech world, the story of Protocol Nightingale. Zora smiled, engaged in the conversations, but a part of her mind was processing the aftermath of that day. The incident had become an inflection point, a moment that had tested the very systems, both personal and professional, that she had built her life around. A month later, she agreed to a single in-depth interview for a cover story in Forbes. The journalist, a sharp, perceptive woman named Alicia Roy, met her at Auratech's sprawling minimalist headquarters in Silicon Valley. She didn't lead with the airline incident, instead asking about Zora's philosophy on business power and innovation. Finally, after an hour, she broached the subject. "There's a story circulating," Alicia began carefully, "about an incident on a flight to London. It involves a protocol from your own software. They're calling it a billion-dollar clapback. What's your perspective on that?" Zora met her gaze, her expression unreadable. She took a thoughtful pause, not for dramatic effect, but because she measured her words with the same precision she used to write code. Respect isn't a perk of success. It's a prerequisite for doing business. Zora stated, her voice calm and even. "My company builds foundational systems for other massive companies. Those partnerships are built on layers of trust and mutual respect. What happened on that flight was a symptom of a systemic failure. An employee of a partner company, empowered by her uniform, and a passenger, empowered by her perceived social standing, made a decision to disrespect a contract, a simple plane ticket. It was a small-scale breach, but it revealed a potential for much larger ones." She leaned forward slightly, her focus intense. "Protocol Nightingale wasn't about revenge. I have no interest in petty vengeance. It was a system check. It revealed a bug in a partner's operating culture. The bug was isolated and removed. The system was then restored. The narrative of a clapback is an oversimplification. This was about contractual integrity, and sometimes," she added, a steely glint in her eyes, "you have to demonstrate the full capacity of a system for people to finally understand and respect its boundaries." The interview became a landmark piece, defining Zora not as a reactionary figure, but as a strategic, formidable leader. Her term, the invisible tax, entered the corporate lexicon describing the constant draining burden of challenging prejudices that successful minorities face. While Zora was defining the future, the past was settling its accounts. For David, the young flight attendant, the end came via a sterile corporate email. His suspension became a termination. He found himself packing up his small New York apartment, the framed photo of him proudly smiling in his Global Airways uniform, now a painful reminder of the career he'd lost. He replayed the moment in his head endlessly. He had just wanted to avoid a confrontation with the aggressive, wealthy-looking woman. His split-second act of biased deference had cost him everything. For Margaret the purser, the result was a slower, more profound humiliation. She wasn't fired. She was demoted. Her 30 years of seniority were wiped away. She was assigned to mandatory retraining courses, sitting in sterile classrooms with new hires half her age, learning the very de-escalation and anti-bias policies she had so arrogantly ignored. The authority she had wielded for decades was gone, replaced by the quiet shame of being a walking cautionary tale for every crew member in the airline. Conversely, for Kevin Wu, the finance blogger, the incident was a life-altering boon. His viral thread became his calling card. Praised for his sharp, real-time reporting, he was flooded with offers, ultimately accepting a lucrative position as a tech and culture columnist for the Wall Street Journal. His life had been transformed by simply being in the right place, witnessing an injustice, and reporting it to the world. The most dramatic collapse, however, happened far from the public eye. Jonathan Prescott was forced to clear out his corner office at Prescott & Finch. The name on the door, his name, felt like a brand of shame. His partners, in a bid to save the firm, had asked for his resignation. The failed Logicor deal had shattered their reputation. As he packed his personal effects into a cardboard box, photos, awards, deal trophies, he felt not just the loss of his career, but the crushing weight of his wife's catastrophic misjudgment. Caroline's downfall was the most complete. The divorce was a cold, transactional affair. Jonathan's lawyers were ruthless. The prenuptial agreement held leaving her with a settlement that felt like pocket change compared to the stratospheric wealth she had commanded. The Park Avenue apartment was sold. The Hamptons estate was sold. The friends she had cultivated over decades of charity galas and exclusive resort holidays now looked right through her. Her calls went to voicemail. Her texts were left on read. She was no longer Mrs. Prescott of Prescott & Finch. She was just Caroline, the woman from the viral video, a pariah. She eventually retreated to a modest, sterile condo in a Florida community surrounded by strangers. The silence of her new life was deafening, a constant reminder of the world she had lost, not to a financial crisis, but to her own unexamined prejudice. One evening, weeks later, Zora was on her new Gulfstream, flying back from a successful meeting in Zurich. She looked out the window at the deep indigo of the stratosphere, the curve of the earth, a faint, glowing line on the horizon. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction at the fates of Caroline Jonathan or the airline crew. There was only a quiet, resolute sense of order restored. Her actions on Flight 112 were not born of malice, but of a deep, unshakable belief that systems, whether they were lines of code running a global logistics network or the unspoken social codes of a first-class cabin, must be fundamentally just. And when a bug is found, it must be fixed. For Zora Washington, soaring at a new altitude of power and influence, the work of debugging the world was only just beginning. So there you have it, a story that started with an act of prejudice over a first-class seat and ended with the complete unraveling of a life built on arrogance. It's a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, you never truly know who you're sitting next to. The person you underestimate, the person you dismiss, might just be the one who designed the system you're living in. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a brutal lesson in cause and effect, where karma wasn't a mystical force, but a contractual clause in a billion-dollar agreement. What do you think? Was the response proportional to the offense? Was this justice, or was it a cold corporate execution? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story of dramatic karma as compelling as we did, make sure to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for more true life stories where consequences are delivered hard and fast. Thanks for listening.